Hello and welcome to a new podcast from WeThe15, the biggest ever human rights movement aiming to end discrimination of persons with disabilities, who make up 15% of the world's population. WeThe15, Access All Areas, is made by the same team behind A Winning Mindset Lessons from the Paralympics, which was the award-winning official podcast of the International Paralympic Committee. My name is Andy Stevenson, I'm a sports broadcaster, and I happen to have a disability myself. Join me in this new series as we take a look at society and investigate how attitudes can be changed to create more opportunities for persons with disabilities, as well as improving representation and amplifying a range of diverse voices. And the subject of this episode is product and design. You're going to be hearing from Dr. Josh Loebner, who is Global Head of Inclusive Design at VML. He's also vision impaired in both eyes. And Christina Mallon, who's helped the likes of Tommy Hilfiger, Unilever, and currently works for Microsoft on inclusive design. I just want to start by asking you both, starting with Christina maybe, about the challenges that your own disabilities have posed as you've climbed the ladder into senior roles in your respective organisations.
The biggest challenge that I've really encountered is not being able to complete tasks as fast as my colleagues, that have working arms and non-neurodivergent brains. I use my voice and my feet to control my computer, which takes about 50% longer than controlling the computer with a keyboard and mouse. And also, the more you rise up in your role, the more tasks and projects you're assigned. And it gets difficult when you can't take notes and you have to remember everything. So I've been really thankful that tools like Copilot and Teams has really come about because that takes notes for me. So those are kind of the biggest problems and challenges that I've encountered continuously throughout my career.
I can certainly empathise with the note taking. You can probably see that I have, as in my job as a sports reporter, often I'm having to remember what's happened in the match just from memory rather than having scribbled stuff down. So I can definitely empathise with that. And Josh, what about the challenges you might have faced?
So there's two different frameworks to think about when it comes to the challenges. Of course, there are individual challenges that I have with regards to my disability, and I would concur with everything that Christina had mentioned, particularly when it comes to pre-planning and thoroughly going through different aspects of a project, potentially prior to other elements of a project, such as an internal in-person meeting where my disability is being somebody who's blind and partially sighted. If a presentation is placed onto a screen in a large boardroom, that's something that might be difficult, if not impossible, for me to interact with. And so an opportunity is to ensure that I have as much information and insight prior to a meeting so that I'm comfortably able to interject if I'm unable to experience everything as equitably and accessibly as others during a meeting. But one other consideration as well is really, I've been in the industry for about 20 years. And when I first came into the industry, it was a bit isolating in that I didn't know too many other people with disabilities. What I've seen in the trajectory, though, is that as one point of fact, there weren't very many employee resource groups or business resource groups where other colleagues that had disabilities were able to connect early on. And wonderfully, as I've continued within my career path, there are more people at my corporation through our employee resource groups and business resource groups, and as well amongst our clients, such as Christina and her teams, that not only are we able to connect from a personnel and collaboration standpoint on a corporate perspective, but personally as well, to be able to identify and connect with others who have similar challenges and impediments and barriers that they're trying to navigate individually. We can hopefully move collectively towards mitigating and defeating those barriers.
That's very good to hear. And of course, that's, broadly speaking, what the WeThe15 campaign is all about, inclusion and just seeing disabled people in these roles and not really kind of giving it a second thought, just increasingly seeing disabled people in all areas of life. So it's good to hear that positivity. And we're going to have a lot of positivity in this chat, but let's just get some negativity out of the way early on. Have either of you ever experienced negative attitudes in your careers?
I have. I would say it was earlier on in my career. I had trouble convincing leadership at previous companies to provide the accommodations that would allow me to be successful. I think as time has gone on, things have gotten better, but that has been a really big challenge for me, especially when I first became disabled, because I didn't exactly know what I need, and I didn't know really how to ask and find help. And I think some people didn't want to go on that journey with me at the organizations I was at. But I've been really lucky at WPP and Microsoft, as those leadership teams have worked with me to find the accommodations that allow me to do my best work.
That is a recurring theme, actually, in all sorts of people we've spoken to on this podcast, and actually even I remember moments like this myself, where I maybe should have asked for help and didn't. I was too scared to ask for help in early stages of my career. Josh, what about yourself? Have you ever encountered negative attitudes?
From a negative attitude perspective, if we consider ambiguity or undecidedness or apathy in the negative realm, then for sure, early on in my career, it was something that was seen as, either from my perspective as an individual employee with disabilities, or pushing for more disability representation and accessibility within advertising and marketing. It was seen as a niche or a nice to have, or something that maybe wasn't even considered within the larger realm of an integrated marketing campaign, or really within any framework. And so the opportunity was that, yeah, there has been a lot of negativity, and to an extent, in certain pockets, there still is. And hopefully through our roles, we can be able to be torchbearers and North Stars to shine lights in those places and spaces where there still are gaps, negativity, and challenges. Definitively, there have been negatives, and negatives also from a silence perspective, where others may not see a need or necessity to be an advocate or an ally in this space, either if they are disabled and they don't want to identify as disabled, or they're non-disabled and they weren't seeing an opportunity to incorporate disability or greater accessibility.
Yeah, I spoke to the Canadian politician Carla in a previous episode of this series, and she says one of the most gratifying moments in her career is when, you know, there is a, let's call it a disability issue brought up in the Canadian Parliament, and everybody just used to sort of turn to her and expect her to stand up and answer the question. And she said it's really brilliant when one of her non-disabled colleagues just grabs the baton and answers the question, and it's not just, oh, let's wait for the disabled person to answer this question about disability. So it's a similar thing to what you're talking about there. Josh, just tell us a bit about what VML do and your role within the organization.
Yeah, definitely. So VML is one of the, if not the world's largest creative agency, with 30,000 plus creators and workforce that strongly comes together to develop innovative and imaginative communications in advertising, marketing, and digital communications. And so my role as global head of inclusive design, what we try to do is work with different internal teams and client teams, such as Christina, to be able to develop not only communications that's accessible, but also to look to pathways to ensure that as we're developing process, that we're listening and learning and hearing from people in disability communities, to ensure that as we move forward within our creative processes, that both internal teams and external communities are all in alignment towards whatever we want to architect and operationalize within our roles, to ensure that the creative output is representative and accessible.
Christina, I want to focus with you on your work currently with Microsoft. But before we get into that, tell us what you did at Tommy Hilfiger, because it's not necessarily a brand that people might not necessarily realize how much work Tommy Hilfiger does in the field of inclusive design.
What's amazing about Tommy Hilfiger is it is one a really well-respected brand, and that the leadership has a connection to the disability community. Tommy Hilfiger's children, some of them have disabilities. So he really understands through and through what it is like to dress someone with a disability that can't dress themselves, or to be the parent of a child that struggles with the independence of dressing themselves. And he saw that and worked with the community and brought Wunderman Thompson on to help with the co-creating of the actual garments and how do you create advertising and brand experiences that are inclusive of the community and made for and with the community. And what I loved about the campaign was, and the actual fashion itself, was that it was all about being able to express oneself, which I think is so key, and why fashion is so much more than something that keeps your body warm. It allows you to really, with colors and patterns and shapes, you get to express how you feel inside. I think especially that it was Tommy Hilfiger, it brought some type of elevation to disability. The biggest challenge that I saw overall, both in my career and then in my personal life, was that people assumed what I couldn't do and what my life would look like. And the number one way to change that is to make disability cool, to change the narrative around that, because it's something that we all experience at some point in our lives, maybe multiple times in our lives. So why are people thinking that it's a bad experience? So it was so important that I really focused the beginning of my career in fashion, in beauty, like we did with Degree and Dove and Tommy, because when you associate yourself with beauty and fashion and the word disability associates itself with it, it normalizes it. And that's why I think it was such a integral part of this disability movement that we're starting to see within brands.
Yeah, I'm actually involved here in the UK with a charity called DressAbility, which makes and alters clothes for disabled people. And I always say those adaptations, to be honest, so much of it is to do with self-esteem. We've got enough challenges going on in our lives, and to be able to go out and look smart, or even just to be able to put our clothes on and off ourselves, that's about pride. And as you mentioned there, like wearing something as cool as Tommy Hilfiger, that's definitely going to help people's self-esteem. You must have witnessed that kind of thing with disabled people who benefited from that kind of work.
I mean, I see it all the time. And then with my nonprofit Open Style Lab, where we take engineers, fashion designers, and occupational therapists with and without disabilities to co-create adaptive garments. I mean, it really is life-changing for you to be able to dress oneself through the way that you want to be dressed, not in something that is very geriatric and not colorful and doesn't represent you. And you being able to get that coat on and do it yourself and have it be fashionable is the difference between someone wanting to leave their house and not leave their house. And that is huge. I've experienced myself, and I see it continuously with the co-creators from Tommy Hilfiger and from Open Style Lab.
And Christina, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I'm so passionate about products that are made with disabled people in mind, but then they benefit a much wider community. I mean, when I think about clothes, for example, I think about shoes, and we've seen, trainers these days now being made where they're more like slip-ons, or you don't need to tie laces, that kind of thing. They're useful for you and me, but they're also useful for everybody, aren't they? That kind of seems to me like it's a sweet spot where accessibility is seen as something that benefits all and not just people who have a disability.
I mean, we've seen this throughout history, not just in fashion. A lot of, the great technological inventions were created with the disability community, with them in mind. We see, things like scanning to voice activation to dictation, closed captioning. And now it's just the better way to do those actions. To watch TV, it's better to have captioning. To, ask your Alexa to remind you of something than having to go to your alarm clock and, set that up using your hands. So it makes sense that we're seeing this in fashion. it always just really excites me when I see someone walking around in Kizit sneakers or the Nike adaptive sneakers that don't have a disability, because they're like, well, they're easier to use. And I say, if we thought more about why was something designed the way it was, instead of just staying with the same designs, I think we would come into a lot more innovation. And the way to do that is when trying to adapt for people with disabilities, because most ways of interacting with products was created not with disability in mind and have been the same forever. But when you ask the question, who am I leaving out? You tend to figure out, wow, this might be a better way to do something. And you come with a better invention. And that's why we see people buy the slip-on shoes or the shirts that have magnetic buttons.
And Josh, presumably you agree?
Most definitely. And in particular, with advertising, an opportunity is that we still have a bit of a ways to go. Christina mentioned captioning, and that's something that if we think of commercials, adverts, advertising that we're creating for brands as product, right? We want to make sure that whatever we're producing is accessible and inclusive. And we are seeing, as an example, when it comes to captions or subtitles, more people, whether deaf or hard of hearing or non-disabled, truly embracing captions, and the same could and should be considered for audio descriptions or other considerations when it comes to our communications, ensuring that color is optimized, that we have live text, that we have alt tags for images. But we could look at a way to see how captions can actually be a multifaceted additive layer to whatever brand narrative we want to convey, so that group who's deaf or hard of hearing or non-disabled that has the captions playing, whether it's on their mobile device or their television or laptop or whatever, gets to be immersed in another consideration of what creativity is and how the captions can share within the words that are incorporated on that lower third, a very sublime story that adds to whatever is being heard or not heard.
Do you think, Josh, that the mindset of global brands is changing? Are they now fully realizing that there's this huge consumer pool of disabled people out there, and of course the pot of money that comes with that pool of people? Do you think they realize now that they perhaps haven't been serving that group of people well enough, and that there's a huge commercial opportunity there?
There is a huge commercial opportunity, and this is something that Christina and I speak on quite often. $13 trillion globally when it comes to expendable income or disposable income, when we think about not only people with disabilities who have monies to spend, but also that circle of people that they're connected to, whether it's their family. As a case in point, my wife is not disabled, my daughters are not disabled, but collectively as a family unit, we all are mindful of those brands that are welcoming disability, show representation, incorporate adaptive products, and also bringing accessibility delightfully into their communication. So it's really a huge number, not only from a financial consideration, but of course, WeThe15, that number says it all, the 15% of the global population that has some type of disability or connected to disability. So yes, brands definitively are considering this. And as well, one other way that brands are seeing the value in this is through research, is either proprietary research conducted by brands to be able to learn more about their consumer base, or research that's open to the industry. For example, Kantar recently produced a wonderful report on the disability consumers and how they're not a niche audience, but from a global perspective, again, bringing that drumbeat of WeThe15 and so many other initiatives to showcase that it's a huge consumer base that hopefully brands should be able to be embracing. And I would be remiss if I didn't nod to Microsoft, who Christina works for and leads in so many ways initiatives on accessibility and inclusion.
Christina, do you I hear sometimes some disabled people sort of get a bit cynical about, oh, these brands are only now suddenly getting into accessibility because they're going to make money out of it. I mean, is that fair? I mean, does that even matter? Does it matter what their motivation is, as long as they're sort of considering accessibility?
Personally, I could care less why they got into it. I'm so sick of being ignored, not thought about, never considered. So my money talks. So if they're going to talk to me and provide resources for me, I'm going to buy. And I know my friends and family feel the same way. But people do bring up they feel like a little bit of ick sometimes when you talk about how much money you can make off of people with disabilities. But that type of thinking has stopped brands from serving us. And I still do not think that, 99% of brand leaders understand that the disability community has $13 trillion of disposable income. And that's why Josh and I and our teams and other disability activists are flying around the world trying to get in front of these brand leads or the people in power to show them why it's important.
And one point I'll interject there is that hopefully those brands that are seeing the value of people with disabilities that do move forward with some type of initiatives, that it's not a flash in the pan or a one and done, but rather hopefully that it could be one point along a larger path of progress towards welcoming people with disabilities. And to an extent, sometimes brands do feel a bit hamstrung or not able to move forward because they feel like they have to have every single thing of their endeavors, whether it's the products that they provide or services or their communications, to be fully accessible across so many different policies and regulations. But from my point of view and so many others, our hope is that brands just take that first movement towards welcoming people with disabilities. And that first movement may be small, but if it's authentic and it's genuine, wonderful. We will accept you, that brand and its products and services where it is, but with the caveat that hopefully that brand has a commitment to strive forward in more ways to start to create a ripple effect of that small welcoming of disability to something that could be larger and more robust.
And actually, I mean, either of you can chip in on this. There are these sort of smaller companies that have been doing great work in accessibility, even though they've got fewer resources than these giant corporations. It feels to me like the giant corporations should be doing this automatically.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from, working at a large corporation. Sometimes, and will admit, things can move slightly slow at big corporations. So at a smaller corporation, there's less hierarchy, less red tape, less things needed to consider, and that they can get things done faster. But what I like about having this and doing this work at a large organization is you can have longevity there and there is support. But, personally myself, I still, spend my nights with my incubator because we can get things done fast. So there has to be a balance, but there are, pros and cons being and working with, small and large organizations because they each have kind of their limits.
Josh mentioned the great work that Microsoft are doing, and I do want to say this. I'm not just saying this because you're on the podcast, Christina, but I think the work that Microsoft and other companies, it has to be said, do around adapting games controllers, for example, is so vital. Back in the 80s and 90s when I was playing, it was like 2 buttons. Now there's buttons all over the controllers. And when I see some of the work adapting controllers for people with all sorts of disabilities to play, I think that is so important, because the playing video games with your mates is often your kind of ticket, if you like, or your way of making those mates in the first place, or establishing and continuing friendships and just feeling part of things. So just talk to us a little bit about the work in that area that Microsoft do.
Gaming and the commitment to the disability community and other marginalized communities from Xbox is so large. They have very big teams that they've staffed up full time to ensure that, we're thinking about the disability community and co-creating in the hardware, in the websites, and when we can, in the games. And as years go by, they're always doing more and upping the bar while also helping other studios that, Microsoft doesn't own and other gaming divisions at other companies they're helping, producing tons of toolkits on how to do proper representation, how to build accessible physical technology. So super impressed and excited to see more. I mean, they worked with Forza to make the game accessible for blind and low vision individuals. So super impressed. And I think their consistent commitment to co-designing with the community is a big key to their success.
Now, I'm going to put you both on the spot here, but I will give you a bit of thinking time. We've been talking about the games controllers and how important they were to me, and I want you to think about a product or a couple of products maybe that have made a huge difference in your own lives. So away from video games, I think how lucky I was that I was a teenager in the late 90s and then sort of a young man into the early noughties when smartphones came out and suddenly we were using touchscreens for things. I could use my mouth on a touchscreen. I can use the small finger I have on one of my arms for a touchscreen. So is there a product or maybe products in your own life? It can be away from your job. This could be something you just use in your personal lives that you would say that product was life-changing for me. Josh, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
So, yeah, I may be a bit expansive and broad in my answer, but hopefully I can come away with a few points that listeners can consider. First, Andy, I do want to give a nod to the Paralympics as to an extent a bit of a product. I've been in this industry for many, many years, and when I first dove into disability inclusion and advertising over 20 years ago, the place that people could connect when it came to disability and advertising was the Paralympics. And prior to the Paralympics, advertisers, when it came to incorporating people with disabilities, primarily showed representation from a charity or pity lens, which is something that we, of course, push away from and try to look 180 degrees different, just showing what people with disabilities can achieve. And the Paralympics were one of the first places to be able to elevate and vault people with disabilities and much more of a positive representation. So that, for me, from a passion perspective, from a professional consideration, was one of the first places that I saw people with disabilities in advertising and, of course, in the games themselves as people who could achieve more, could do things. And now we're seeing much more of an expansive opportunity to, within brands coming to the fore, showcasing how their products and services can authentically be represented and connect with disability communities so powerfully. Second point, just to share quickly, personally, a product that helps me as somebody who's blind or partially sighted. It's difficult for me to see clocks on the wall or be able to type notes as easily. When it comes to different devices, I really enjoy all of the Amazon products that have speakers. That's one right beside me, so I'm not going to name it, but to be able to easily create appointments, hear from it, and also be delighted from the entertainment that it has to offer without having to fumble with knobs or other things that are difficult for me to see or feel. It's been truly a revolution. The last product that I'll mention that, from my perspective, I'm extremely proud to be a part of is what WPP is striving forward with. And we're creating, in collaboration with Microsoft and others, a scalable audio description platform that allows advertisers and brands to be able to easily and effectively at scale create more accessible communications within their advertising and marketing. The audio descriptions create more of a sublime understanding of what's taking place in the totality of the video. And right now, that's a bit challenging from a product perspective in working with third-party vendors or others outside of agencies and brands to be able to effectively implement. But within WPP, through collaborations with artificial intelligence experts, as well as others at Microsoft, to be able to bring things like this to life, productizing accessibility within marketing and advertising is something that we are moving forward with, which we're truly proud of.
Christina, what has been especially life-changing for you?
I'm going to agree with Josh. I think voice activation and dictation is probably the number one. Again, I kind of thank my lucky stars that I became disabled maybe later in life because dictation is getting better and better with time and has gotten significantly better about 10 years ago and will even get better in the future. Another thing that's not having to do with work is Izzy Miyake is a Japanese fashion designer that has a line called Please Please. And it doesn't use closures much. And it really doesn't wrinkle for how the technology is. And I can slip that on and off myself. And it looks very chic. It doesn't dirty easily. That allows me to not have to bring anyone with me when I travel. And because I can slide in, slide out with a few adaptations that I created. So that's been really, really important. And that's outside of technology.
Your answer surprised me to a certain extent, but do you think just the average person in the street would realize that an item of clothing could have that impact? You know, that is the difference between you being able to travel by yourself and not travel by yourself. Do you think people would actually appreciate that or realize that?
They don't. And that's why I think, Josh and myself are really lucky for the positions that we're in, because we can get to the brand leaders and say, no, like that decision to either keep that product, create that product, or discontinue that product can have a huge effect on our lives. And I think we saw this at Microsoft with gaming. People were like, okay, that's great, but why are you putting time in, accessible gaming? Why aren't you giving huge donations to organizations to fund cure for diseases? And when Microsoft does that, and we help with our AI, being able to game with your friends is such a huge part of your life as someone who's interested in gaming that it can be the difference between someone being included in their friend group or excluded. And I think that brands have so much power. And that's why, when I was diagnosed, instead of, joining a nonprofit, looking for a cure, trying to raise money, I didn't go that route, which people thought I would go. I said, no, I'm going to use my design strategy and marketing experience to make a sea change within this industry. And I also wanted to see it in physical design, because I knew that was so impactful for me being not depressed. I mean, having ALS and saying, hey, here's a disease that really only affects older men, and we're not exactly sure if it's that, and then, there's no cure, and nothing works for you. It was hard, but being able to just get back into society because of how these brands have created products and how individuals have created beautiful marketing campaigns where I felt seen, that changed my life.
I'd like to take a quick second and just talk about the power of advertising. Sometimes for people who are not in the advertising industry, advertising may seem like a bit of a veneer or not purposeful. But from my point of view, as somebody with a disability, and particularly with the Paralympics, when we watch Paralympics, when we see those athletes, when we are able to witness moments of triumph and records being broken, there's an emotional connection that we all have during that time we're seeing those athletes. And why, as a viewer, should we have something that we can authentically connect with in the Paralympics or other media that authentically represents people with disabilities, then have some gap where there's not representation, where there's not accessibility? That's the power of where advertising can be that bridge between the programming that is authentic to keep that momentum going, to keep that emotion there, to showcase that it's not only the Paralympics that are inclusive, accessible, and welcoming to people with disabilities, but all of these other brands, this larger ripple effect of so many that are aligning with the Paralympics and this community to say that we are here now and we are here beyond these games every day to showcase that we can be part of your life. And so, again, I'm so thankful for the Paralympics, but also so thankful for all of those that are sponsors of the Paralympics, that create that advertising, that keep that continuum methodically and cumulatively going, that showcase the power of welcoming people with disabilities, whether it's in a 30-second cinematic masterpiece of an advertisement or that last mile of a finish line of a marathon where a blind runner is crossing that finish line.
I think that's a big part of what the WeThe15 campaign has been established to do, is to help keep the momentum going. Just when you look at your own experiences going back when you started out in your respective industries, but certainly now, currently, are there enough disabled people involved within the industries themselves? As in, are there enough in the decision making?
There are more of us, but not enough of us. But Josh, let me know if you agree on that statement.
There are more of us, but not enough of us, right? It's something where it's still a small enough group that we all know each other and connect regularly, but it needs to grow. And particularly when we think about disability communities being undereducated, underemployed, we have an opportunity as leaders in this space to be able to show to others that there are companies such as Microsoft, WPP, VML, amongst others, that are North Stars in this space, and that there can be opportunities. And so through employee resource groups, through corporations creating positions, we are moving forward. But yes, there needs to be more, for sure.
Yeah, and I think also accommodations at the end of the day. Like, you know, I think everyone needs accommodations to do their best work, and having businesses really make it easy to have accommodations. And I think the more we can create great working environments for people with disabilities, we're going to see more people coming out about their disability and using their lived experience to make their company better. And then also more people with disabilities will be hired.
And when we look to the future, I mean, Josh, I think it was, who mentioned AI a few moments ago. Just sort of look into crystal balls for us and give us a sense of where you think we're going with inclusive design in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Yeah, this is something that, again, Christina and I do speak on quite often, is artificial intelligence at the confluence of accessibility and what that means to people in disability communities. Ultimately, it's an opportunity. I'm sure you've heard the phrase with, not for, that as we architect what's next in the future when it comes to both accessibility and AI and intersection, that people with disabilities are voices at the table to ensure that as we develop any product or service in alignment with artificial intelligence, that it can be welcoming and with people with disabilities in a way that makes sense for them. And we're seeing that. The many initiatives and endeavors that Microsoft is spearheading and leading when it comes to artificial intelligence definitively incorporate people with disabilities and support them in so many different ways, as Christina has mentioned before, and myself in this conversation. It's really an amazing time to be in this role, connecting with brands, because things that weren't achievable just a few months ago are easily scalable today and will be tomorrow. Artificial intelligence is allowing people to iterate and move much more rapidly in a way that, whether it's for large corporations or small startups, was a significant struggle, either from a time, personnel, or financial commitment. Artificial intelligence is really opening new ways to be able to iterate and reinterpret potentially inaccessible products towards being more accessible, and also to be able to scale them in ways that hadn't been achievable before. And that scalability isn't something that's just being seen in, for example, first world parts of the global geography, but as well, the scalability through AI for more adaptive and accessible products could in the future be something that could be more attainable for those developing countries and individuals who are not only marginalized from a disability perspective, but also from financial or socioeconomic constraints. So I'm so excited to be where I am right now, to be able to collaborate with individuals and groups such as Christina and Microsoft to propel conversations and commitments forward in ways that had only been dreamt about before.
Christina?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to work in the industry that we're working in. I think we've seen glimpses into the future when it comes to accessibility and AI, being able to scale technology and make it cheaper. Accessible technology is expensive, especially in growing economies. People feel a little bit uneasy, but I think is really interesting is, you know, the brain to computer interface. They've had their first successful implementation. I think when I look into 15 years, I think that's going to be a little bit more common in the disability space, especially for people with motor disabilities.
As in thinking something and it will happen for you, to put it in very simple terms.
Correct. In either to like a computer when you're thinking a laptop, or to like a prosthetic limb.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we're starting to see the ability to create a whole library of your voice with just a few seconds of audio. And that is something that Microsoft is working on and close to my heart, because I have ALS and many of my friends have ALS and are not able to speak. And I think care will get better. I think AI is just going to really accelerate everything. And as long as we do it in a safe way and we really follow the responsible AI principles and we're co-creating with the community, I think AI is going to do a ton of good for the disability community.
A lot of these things we've been talking about are going to be within our reach in our respective countries. But of course, there'll be disabled people in developing countries, poorer countries, who some of these things will just seem like a pipe dream. What is being done, what can be done to make some of these great innovative products available to everybody around the world, regardless of where they are and what kind of resources they have?
Typically at Microsoft, we are working and focusing heavily on the global south. We understand that there are cost restraints to technology and using AI to figure out how we can make that cheaper, and then figuring out ways how we can make our first-party accessible technology built into Windows just as good as the third-party technology, like in software that you have to buy, accessibility technology, so that we can offer ours, for free and with comparable service to pay-for-play assistive technology. Our nonprofit team is working with disability nonprofits within the Global South and to understand how we can upskill. So it's a multiple-pronged approach with how we are trying to make it cheaper, more accessible, and easier for individuals with disability to use some of our services.
And Josh?
Advertising and marketing and connecting with people is something that we wanted to ensure that everything that we're doing, whether it's connecting with countries anywhere, the global south or otherwise, that it's accessible and inclusive. And not just for particular products or services, but those that can be everyday luxuries that are easily affordable to individuals on any day, regardless of where they are. What we need to be mindful of is that for those products, for those services, that we can be welcoming, and to showcase that people with disabilities can effectively and accessibly be a part of those communications, whether it's through representation on screen or that the communication themselves or itself rather is accessible. Hopefully the opportunity is that as an employer, we can be as welcoming to as many different diverse individuals that have the wherewithal and experience to be able to move into advertising and marketing roles, whether in the global south or otherwise. And so we have a number of different internships and initiatives that do welcome marginalized people from marginalized groups to start to move into our industry and to be able to early on see that they have a value in place within creativity.
Well, Christina Mallon and Dr. Josh Loebner, thank you so much, both of you, for your time and wisdom this afternoon. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks for having us.
Andy, thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion all about product and design. And I don't know about you, but I found it encouraging how some of the world's biggest brands do now seem to be trying to reach out to persons with disabilities. The next episode in this WeThe15 podcast series is all about education. I'll be speaking to Rodrigo Hubner Mendez, founder and CEO of his namesake institute, a non-profit organisation trying to guarantee that every child with a disability has access to quality education. And also I'll be speaking to Liz Johnson, a former Great British Paralympic swimmer, who'll be speaking to me about her own journey through school and university, and how she now leads the UK's first disability-led employment agency.